believe in God? Despite that belief, do you find yourself struggling with anger, depression, sadness, feelings of worthlessness? Have you or a loved one contracted COVID-19? Someone you know or someone close to you get very sick or die from COVID-19 or some other illness? Are you not understanding how that could happen, and at the same time there could be a God? Are you angry? You're confused by the whole world, by everything that's going on. If any of these things are the case, then this is the video series for you. Welcome to episode 6 of our Soul Snacks series, where we've been focusing on the book Universal Garden of Emuna, which is a book by Rabbi Shalom Arush that aims to deepen our understanding of what it means to have faith in God. Emuna is the ancient Hebrew biblical word for a deep faith in God. Once again, I want to give my standard caveat that if you are an atheist, I'm not criticizing you, I'm not judging you in any way, but this is probably not a video series that you're going to want to watch. You're not going to enjoy it. I would simply ask that you please, not use this space to try to convince other folks that there's not a God, or you start getting into arguments about whether there's a God or no God. This is not the space for that. There are many other platforms on the internet where you can engage in those discussions. This is not one of them. Also a reminder, this is not an attempt by me to try to capture everything that Rabbi Arush says in this book. Universal Garden of Emuna is a book that is extremely rich with very deep spiritual insights. I'm certainly not a rabbi. I'm not a priest. I'm not an imam. I'm not a pastor. I'm not qualified in the least, really, nor could I ever come close to conveying these things. I do have a set of skills as an attorney in communicating, so I'm applying some of those skills to this book. And also, the reason I'm doing this is because I feel like this was a book that helped me a lot in my life. So I'm going ahead and giving over in the best way that I know how what I got out of the book. Basically, this series is merely designed to present what I see as some of the highlights of the book, in the hopes that you're going to go maybe want to get a copy of the book and delve into it and get as much as the book as I've gotten out of it. And that brings us to our final little piece of housekeeping here, and that is, if you live in Virginia or North Carolina and you'd like a copy of this book, the Universal Garden of Emuna, completely free, all you got to do is contact us at the number or the email on the screen, and we'll get one right out to you. Let's dive right into it. The last time we were deep into chapter 4 of the book, which is entitled Tests of Emuna. God is constantly sending us challenges, setting us tests, but everything comes back to our main theme, and that is that God controls everything, and you have to understand that God controls everything, and you have to, once you realize that, you can give yourself over to the faith that He controls everything, and the deep, abiding, unshakable faith that everything is done for a proper reason and proper purpose and is controlled by God. We left off by saying that worry and at the same time trust in God, those things are mutually exclusive. And really that through prayer and deep faith in God, there's really nothing to worry about. The same way a happy small child, he's just hanging out playing in his sandbox because he understands that things are being taken. He doesn't really understand anything. He just knows that things are going to be taken care of. And we can also live our lives with sort of a childlike wonder and childlike happiness if you live your life with Emuna. So on page 145, Rabbi Arush talks about Emuna in the context of someone who's experiencing financial problems. And as we know, this is another test of Emuna, and financial difficulties and problems are certainly, and earning a living in general is a big test of Emuna, and that's what he spends a lot of this chapter on, because a lot of people struggle with that. He gives several examples of worried business people seeking advice from a very wise pastor, who in turn give these business people the tools they need to connect with God and really no longer suffer through those business dealings. So the thing to do that he says, if you have a business, is to make God the boss, right? So, you're either going to accept God as the CEO of your business, or you're going to shoulder all the problems yourself, which is really a prescription for constant worry. Right? Arush then he talks about the dangers of purchasing numerous items on credit, Is that's like a thing, that's like not an Emuna thing. So if you run a business or whatever it is that you do in your life, you just keep running up your credit, even when you can't afford something just because you want to keep up with the Joneses, that shows a lack of faith in God. Because if God wanted you to have the more expensive car, the bigger house, you'd be able to afford it. But the ego gets in the way all the time, right? And the ego says, "No, I gotta show off. I gotta keep up with so and so. He's got the Porsche. I gotta have the Porsche. I've got to have the Lexus. He's got the Lexus. I gotta have And next thing you know, you're up to your ears in debt." He then quotes King Solomon in Proverbs, who once said, "A man of faith will increase his blessings, but the impatient to be rich will not be exonerated." Very wise statement. That and he repeats this over and over again. What's going to come to you is going to come to you in its good and proper time. To try to grab it earlier than that, it's not a good idea, and it shows a lack of faith in God. Those in business who truly have faith in God, he goes on to say, know that our livelihood doesn't depend on craftiness, doesn't depend on cunning. Yes, you have to apply yourself. Yes, you have to do the things that are necessary to keep the business going. But it only really depends on God. You have to do your part, of course, but it depends on God. But failure to do this, the ruthless chasing of money, can often be at the expense, as we know, of physical and emotional and spiritual health. So at its core, Rabbi Arush is saying that being in business is a continuous test of faith. He says that without Emuna, so you're drinking from the spiritual equivalent of a sewer pipe, where your income is contaminated with all kind of negative emotions, bad health, damage to your soul. He says really there's only two choices when it comes to business, when it comes to your livelihood. One, you can believe and understand that God determines what you're entitled to, which is the truth. Every penny is designated to you is going to reach you, and this is a very common, composed way to live. On the other hand, you could also be the kind of person who doesn't really have faith in God or his ability to support you, and so you bang your head against the wall, right? And you spend most of your days angry, irritable, your debts pile up, and you're under constant stress. You maybe cut corners on proper business practices, do some things that are a little shady to make more money. And so then Rabbi Arush gets us into this really amazing story, which I'm going to spend a few minutes on because I think it's a great story. Talks about this in the context of this man who lived back in the 18th century, this great rabbi called the Baal Shem Tov. The Baal Shem Tov was the rabbi who basically started what you may have heard of, the Hasidic movement in Judaism. And this came about around the same time. It was basically an enlightened movement in Judaism. Came about around the same time that the Western world was also going through the Enlightenment, the 18th century, back in the 1700s. And the Baal Shem Tov lived in what is now Ukraine. So the story is told of this guy. Coincidentally, his name is Joey. And he was a disciple of the Baal Shem Tov who was tempted to steal. Okay? So basically he tried to get his livelihood through a way, he was poor, he tried to get his livelihood in a way that wasn't so good. He was a very pious person, don't get me wrong, but he just had this evil inclination hit him that says, I got to do it. So he decided to what he did is he set his sights on this mansion where this lady lived. Her name was Lady Sarah. Lady Sarah was the daughter of this very, very wealthy merchant who lived in town, and he had died, and she was his only child. So she was very wealthy. And so what does he do? Joey waits till it's nighttime, this very pious person, he breaks into the mansion, and for whatever reason, found it very easy to get in. The dogs that are there, they're not barking, they're not sleeping. Front door's unlocked. No trouble. There was a watchman there. The guy's sleeping, right? He goes in, and he sees like abundance like he has never seen in his life. I mean, so opulent, beautiful fixtures, crystal, artwork from around the world. Now, he had been there before to get a donation from Sarah's father when he was alive. Okay, so he knew, and it just so happened that he saw where the safe was because Sarah's father didn't have any problem just going to the safe and getting the money out. So he knew where the safe was. And lo and behold, he goes over to where the safe was. I guess it was behind a picture or something. The safe pops open. And inside, safe pops open, diamonds, gold, stacks of money, stacks of coins, almost endless wealth, all for the taking. So all he had to do was grab it and run. But the more he looked at it, the more he asked, why, wait a minute, why has this been so easy? What is going on here? He looked at this money, all the jewels and the money. And he said the more he felt guilty, he remembered what the Baal Shem Tov taught him. If this money is supposed to come to you, it's going to come to you in its proper time. And he realized that. He says, I don't have to violate the Ten Commandments in order to get this money. So he got terrified. He ran out, didn't take anything, ran out of the place. And the next day, he cried and he begged all day and he prayed all day for God to please forgive him. How could he ever think of doing such a horrible thing? Now, that night, he received a summons from his rabbi, the Baal Shem Tov. He was terrified. So, this is not good. He knows what happened. Because the Baal Shem Tov was a very holy guy. He got very deep spiritual insight. So he knew what happened. He figured he knew what happened. I'm in big, big trouble, and I'm going to really get it. And he was quaking in his boots. So he's sitting in front of the Baal Shem Tov now, and the rabbi tells him that he received a message from Lady Sarah. Now here it comes, right? And he says, do you know who I mean? So he's thinking, I'm busted. That's it. I mean, he probably didn't use those words, but he said, I'm busted. It's all, the jig is up. I'm done. He's turning red. He's turning white. He feels like he's about to pass out. He can hardly breathe. I mean, he just wanted to crawl in a hole, and he felt like a worm, and he just wanted to crawl into a hole and die. So the Baal Shem Tov says, look, listen, you should know that she's an only child, Lady Sarah, and she appointed me as her guardian, and she asked me to try to find a suitable husband for her. And last night, for whatever reason, I thought of you. And I want you to, you're single and you're a very pious man, and I think you'd be perfect together, and I want you to prepare for the wedding without delay. Boom, you're getting married to Lady Sarah. So he came out of the Baal Shem Tov's house totally amazed at God's providence. I mean, what if he hadn't passed the test and he had taken the money? I mean, all this money that was destined to be his anyway through this marriage. And by the way, Lady Sarah said, I don't want you to do, whoever she marries, she doesn't want them to do any kind of business. Her father taught her how to do business. She wanted to marry a person who just studied all day like this guy did. Studied and got close to God all day. That's who she wanted. So it was just perfect. All he had the ability to learn all day and live like a king. And had he done this terrible deed, it never would have come to him. So he then realized, life is such a thin tightrope. Right? The thinnest line between good and evil, between happiness and despair, huge success and utter failure. And he thanked God for giving him the opportunity to live like this and to be able to live his life in the proper way. He thanked God for giving him the strength to resist the temptation to steal when it mattered most. He realized that God has his own timetable for us. We can't force the issue by going against his commandments. So then Rabbi Arush then moves into the subject of business in general and brings out the fact that, look, everything's controlled by God, as we said before. On page 158, he talks about the business person who thinks that everything that happens in his business, all his successes, are due to his own efforts and business acumen. Certainly, like I said before, you have to make the effort. But at the end of the day, your income is going to be allotted to you by God, period. It's not going to be one penny less. It's not going to be one penny more than what it's supposed to be. Folks that don't believe this are going to make promises about their products, about their services. They're going to do what we call, I guess in the business, we call puffery. They're going to say things about what they got going on, plagued by their arrogance and ego. When they do achieve success, they think it's up to them, and it's by their own efforts. And when we know, everything comes from God. You ever seen a person like this that has all of a sudden, they run up against something and they don't win a business deal, they don't get what they thought they were supposed to get? It's a horrible thing to see. Temper tantrums, cursing, throwing things, just horrible. You want to be that person? I mean, I don't think so. So Rabbi Arush then asked the question, look, we all know people who are very quote-unquote successful, and they don't have one iota of Emuna. What's going on there? Many of these folks may have even achieved success through lying, cheating, stealing. How are they allowed to do this? Where's God in all this, right? So that gets us into the very famous answer, which I'll quickly go over, set forth by our wise sages, and that is basically what would happen if every time a person sinned, a bolt of lightning would come down and strike him and shock him and hurt him. And every time somebody did a good deed, he'd get a $100,000 check, like right on the spot. I mean, no one would ever really have a choice anymore, would they, in what they were doing? We would all be basically coerced into doing good or bad, or what appeared to be good or bad, nobody would ever know what really good or bad it was, because we were just, getting rewards and punishments directly. So God set up the world so we actually have the ability to choose to do good, even though the reward might not be clear right away, and choose to stay away from bad, even though, the punishment might not always be clear and in front of us right away. So at the end of the day, we're each, regardless of any of that, we're each going to get precisely what we deserve, and it's going to come to you in due time. So when a thief gets money, Rabbi Arush says that what he's actually done is grab something that is not actually his, and he may have stripped his children or his grandchildren or his further descendants from receiving what they're supposed to receive. And the money's going to turn sour in his hands. Somehow, some way, it's going to be taken from him, taken from his descendants. Or the thief is going to have to go a very unpleasant cleansing after they die of their soul. Something so painful that it's unimaginable. So when you believe your money is going to reach you in its proper time, it's like paradise. When you believe it's all up to you, then you've created basically a hell on earth for yourself. So in the same vein of thought, Rabbi Arush talks about gambling. Just says, look, there's a template for this, the evil inclination to let you see somebody who's made it with the gambling, and, look, it never really works out. It looks like it works out for them, but it's not going to work out for you, And the root issue of all this is money. Money is not really meant for your exclusive use. It's a stipend that's meant for you to help support your family and all those who depend on you. If you were single, you'd probably make less. So on page 165, Rabbi Arush reminds us, those who truly have Emuna know that the quality of their lives doesn't depend on how much money they have. It depends really on the extent to which they acquire Emuna, their deep, deep, unshakable faith in God, and the extent to which they perform God's will. They pray, give charity, at least 10%, tithes, as many folks call them, and engage in penitence. That's the only solutions to financial problems, not trying to grab and grab and grab and grab. Now, just an aside, this word that I just mentioned, penitence, or the act of repenting, also known, another version of the word is atonement. Okay, very dirty word to the Western mind, right? Sounds like old-fashioned, but in our tradition, atonement is central, really, to success in life. All it really means is that, you're focused on something that you did wrong, you're aware of it, you sincerely regret it, and you are determined, and you state before God that you're determined to fully resolve never to do whatever it is that you did wrong, ever again. All of this, again, before God in the form of deep and mindful and sincere prayer. All right, and through doing this, it's like a cleansing process. You're cleansing yourself of these things, so you can move forward and not be stuck in the same place you were before. And as Rabbi Arush will get into later in the book, this requires frequent reflection and evaluation of your own actions. In fact, just before the end of the chapter, Rabbi Arush tells us that this is God's greatest satisfaction. Somebody who is living their life, when God's sons and daughters approach him with daily prayer, evaluating themselves and trying to do better, that's God's greatest satisfaction in us. One who doesn't go through this process, who just, keeps trying to grab and grab and grab, as I said before, riches are likely to bounce off this person. Why would God enrich such a person? I mean, they're just going to end up with the same issues and the same problems, just with more money. It's not going to solve the core issues that these people are dealing with. And, there's so much more in this chapter that we really don't have time to get into. But I do want to touch on one more thing, which Rabbi Arush says is really the most important test of Emuna in our lives. And we'll end here for this time. And of course, that issue is marriage. Okay? And I see I'm sure many of you right now are nodding your heads, because you know that that's true. Marriage and family life makes enormous demands on our time, our energy, our money, and a lot of times our nerves, right? We get so frustrated sometimes. Sometimes we're humiliated. And as Rabbi Arush says, Emuna, of course, is the only way to pass those tests. He goes so far as to say that the true character development of a person doesn't begin really until he or she marries. Because when you're not married, you can avoid the issue of having to deal with this person or dealing with certain people that you have to live with. But a responsible married person, you can't just walk away. So really, your wife and children, or your spouse and your children are the ultimate diagnostic test of Emuna. He gives an example of an egocentric person who attacks everyone around him. And so when he gets married, this guy gets married and doesn't have Emuna, he's likely going to tear his marriage and his family completely apart. A married person basically should be a giver, okay? A giver. You can't be a taker. So, and if both parties have Emuna, you're going to have a marital peace. If both people are givers, you're going to have marital peace. And you have to look at everything through the lens of Emuna. A person without Emuna, they're going to go and they're going to blame their spouse for everything. The complaints are going to keep pouring forth all the time because they're not going to look to God as the cause of anything. They're going to be looking at their spouse as the cause of everything. And this is just a prescription for the end of a marriage, basically. And it's a pressure cooker that's going to explode in a very bad way. And Rabbi Arush wisely notes that, look, everybody knows that a good marriage, well, many people think that a good marriage is just automatic. It's not. It takes a lot of work. And many people today, in our society, with everything is just everything is just given to you. We have throwaway things. We have things that don't last like they used to last. People think, well, if it doesn't work, it's uncomfortable, I'll just get out. It's another throwaway thing. But really, it all has to do with the fact that marriage ultimately is not a give and take situation, as many people would say. It is only giving, according to Rabbi Arush. So, and also, as he says, marriage is the prime training ground for Emuna. The root cause of divorce, really, if you look at it deeply, is the lack of Emuna. As I just said, a person without Emuna is going to blame their spouse for everything. Of course, there are some abusive situations where divorce is really the only solution. But in most circumstances, divorce doesn't solve the issues, right? And not only this, Rabbi Arush mentions on page 173, divorce isn't the end of the problems. It's usually just the beginning. I mean, you're going to have to spend the rest of your life. Usually there's kids connected to it. There's going to be uncomfortable family situations. There's going to be the education. Decisions have to be made on the education of the mutual children to the family. Hostile former in-laws. Very uncomfortable, awkward situations. And these persist for the remainder of your life. So, the person who has not properly prayed, reflected, and repented, you're just going to go on to the next marriage with the same problems you had before. You think that a new marriage and a new life with a new person is going to solve those problems, but if you haven't taken the proper steps in Emuna, the same core issues in your life are just going to continue. The same core problems are going to continue. The solution is proper marital instruction before marriage, coaching before marriage in Emuna, and this is essential to marital bliss. He gives a few quick examples, for instance, and he's got other books on this that you can look up. If you look into Rabbi Arush, you'll see he has some other books on this. I know there's one he has that's specifically meant for men and one that's specifically meant for women to read. One of the things that he says, is very good advice, is a husband really should refrain from criticizing his wife. I mean, there's many times that you feel like, your wife deserves it, quote unquote deserves it. But, listen, he says over and over again, women want to feel loved and respected. When you criticize them, it tears them apart. You might feel that it's your right to do so, but when you criticize them, you're just tearing them apart. Try to refrain from doing that. Second little piece of advice he gives: a husband has to listen patiently to his wife. Failure to do this, it's a major culprit behind an unhappy marriage. I mean, your spouse wanted a soulmate, and this applies to really both parties. Your spouse wanted a soulmate to share their life with, and someone who doesn't cherish and listen to their spouse demonstrates you're not that person anymore, right? So, don't do that. Try to pay attention to what your spouse is saying to you and listen to them intently and cherish what they have to say to you, because this is your soulmate. This is who you're married to. Now, at the end of the chapter on page 184, Rabbi Arush sets forth a beautiful prayer to God where you ask God to strengthen your Emuna, because ultimately everything comes with God, and so does, you have to try to strengthen it yourself, but we also ask God for help in doing that. So he brings forth a beautiful prayer, which I will not relate now because it's pretty long, but I encourage you to look at that. And that brings us to our final little piece of housekeeping, which I'll reiterate, and that is, if you live in Virginia or North Carolina and you would like a copy of the book, please do not hesitate to call us or email us at the information on the screen. We'd be happy to send you a book. Okay. Now, in the next chapter, of chapter 5, Rabbi Arush talks about the virtues of Emuna, and God willing, we hope to explore that together next time. Until then, this is Joe Miller. God bless. Have a great day. Joe Miller out.